Welcome, and good evening, and welcome to the Museum of Contemporary Art of Australia. And what a fabulous venue this is. I heard all about how the renovations took place to bring out this new Art Deco venue. And we're delighted that you and everyone live streaming this evening could join us here tonight. My name is Karen Van Sacker, and I am Director of Divisional Advancement STEM, Science, Engineering, Technology and Maths at the University of Melbourne. If I may, just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. The restrooms are through the doors through which you came. In the event of an emergency, the MCA staff will direct us to the nearest exit. And if I could ask that everybody turn their mobiles to silent. And lastly, after the formal proceedings, please remain to continue the conversation with everybody here tonight. At this time, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land upon which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation of this place we now call Sydney. I would like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and to any Aboriginal people here today, wherever you may come from. We must all remember that Indigenous Australians are our first innovators and educators, and we at the University of Melbourne are grateful for the role they play with us to educate the next generation of leaders. Tonight, we will explore the innovation challenge and the role of universities in global economies. We're delighted to convene for you a panel of experts from the University of Melbourne who will consider the topic of innovation and the possibilities that innovation creates. Firstly, it will be my pleasure to introduce you to the University of Melbourne's 20th Vice-Chancellor, Professor Duncan Maskell. Also joining the panel from Melbourne, we have Professor Felicity Baker, Professor Glenn Hetker, and Maxine McHugh. I'd like to welcome also the members of the Sydney Alumni Association present here tonight. The association organizes a wonderful program of talks from industry leaders and a range of social events that includes the highly popular annual reception at the Archibald exhibition. I also welcome, is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. I also welcome the committee members of the Melbourne Business School's New South Wales chapter. And if you look around today and see people with gold stars on their name tags, that would be members of either one of those associations. And I encourage you to speak to them about the different programs that occur in the city over the course of a year. So you are part of a community of 400,000 strong, globally strong alumni community. And we encourage you to take advantage of this incredible network. In New South Wales alone, there are some 8,500 alumni that we know of. We know there's many more than that, I'm sure, most of whom are based around Sydney. We're grateful for all that you do to stay connected with the university and to support those who came after you. Some of you have been supporting the university as donors, as expert advisors, as alumni mentors, and as student internship hosts. To you, I say thank you. For our students, having access to a Melbourne education is an incredible asset, and having access to the insights and life experiences of the Melbourne alumni community can make an enormous difference. For our researchers and our students, the gift of philanthropy and volunteerism and the impacts you enable through your generosity is life-changing and world-changing. So thanks again to all of you who contribute so generously to the university in so many ways. So now for the main event, let me introduce to you our panel. Professor Duncan Maskell is the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Melbourne. Prior to joining us, he was Senior Pro-Vice-Chancellor at the University of Cambridge. An esteemed scientist in his own right, he has worked extensively with industry on research, consulting, and executive education. Professor Felicity Baker is Head of Music Therapy and Director of International Research Partnerships for the Creative Arts and Music Therapy Research Unit. She is internationally renowned for her innovative research, particularly in the development of theoretically informed and targeted interventions that use a therapeutic songwriting process to address a range of health needs. Our third panelist is Professor Glenn Hetker, HMS Trust Chair of Social Innovation at the Melbourne Business School. I'm almost done. Glenn is a strategist who works at the intersection of innovation and sustainability. He has a particular interest in the challenges and opportunities of cooperation between innovative organizations and in how knowledge moves between organizations. And finally, we're delighted to have Maxine McHugh here this evening to facilitate the conversation. Maxine is Honorary Enterprise Professor of the Melbourne Graduate School of Education. Her background traverses both journalism and politics, and for many years, you would have known her as a familiar face to the ABC. You can read more about each of our guests on the leaflet set on your seat, but for now, I'd like to pass the lectern to Professor Maskell for a university update and some insights and reflections on his first 10 months at the University of Melbourne. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Karen. The first challenge is that there is a staircase immediately behind me here. So if you see me disappear suddenly, in Monty Python fashion, it'll be because of an accident, not an intentional act. What a joy it is to be in this great city. Apart from anything else, seeing the sun and feeling 5 degrees at least warmer in the ambient temperature has been a great pleasure. But I must say, I think Melbourne's a great place too. So. Like you, Karen, I start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands and waters of this area, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to the Indigenous elders, past, present and emerging. And although we're not on their land tonight, I include in this an acknowledgement of other Indigenous communities across the enormous continent that is Australia, and two of whom I've spent time with in very recent days, the Gumatj and other Yolngu peoples, speaking peoples of the North East Arnhem Land, and the Yorta Yorta people of the Goulburn Valley in Victoria, where we were privileged to hear Senator Dodson give the Dungala Kaila oration the other night. I was in North East Arnhem Land for the Garama Festival of Traditional Cultures 2 weekends ago, and as I said, in the Goulburn Valley for the Dungala Kaila oration. And these are both very important occasions for the celebration of Aboriginal culture and knowledge. I've been very interested in First Nations matters for a very long time, actually, even from the UK. It's an interesting thought experiment to think about what a First Nations person might be in the UK, actually. There was an ice age there until about 11,500 years ago, and somebody walked into that country 11,500 years ago and first colonised the place. So we have Indigenous populations in many places in different ways, but of course the Indigenous populations here are many tens of thousands of years old, and that's a significant difference. I've been very pleased recently in the last few days to announce the university's newest big initiative, which is the generation of the Indigenous Knowledge Institute. We hope that this institute will become a world centre, documenting, curating, preserving and disseminating Indigenous knowledge in partnership, of course, and led by Indigenous communities. And that's a very important point, actually. Spending a lot of time with Indigenous people and communities is one of the most rewarding parts of my very exciting role so far. And I've been privileged to be the Vice-Chancellor at Melbourne since last October. Tonight, as Karen, I think, mentioned, we have an opportunity to have a really interesting conversation. We're going to be focused on innovation and the roles of universities in the innovation landscape. And this is something that's very close to my heart, an important part of my career, both before I came to Melbourne and since, has been about exactly this issue. In fact, I got an email yesterday evening from one of the things I've left behind in Cambridge, which is a company I founded about 1.5 years ago, where they were showing me a term sheet for a deal with Procter & Gamble, so that's quite interesting. So for me, innovation and entrepreneurship has always been about brilliant people, actually. Of course, brilliant people in universities who get involved in the innovation landscape, but also, and this is the thing that people don't really think about too much, there are many brilliant people working in industry and government and throughout the community, and putting these brilliant people together to do some really spectacular things, to get knowledge out there into the real world, to make a difference, has been a real passion of mine for a long time. So I did my PhD at Cambridge. I did my first degree at Cambridge, but I did my PhD at Cambridge as well. But that was a very interesting funding mechanism whereby I was funded by a company, and that was Wellcome Biotech back in the early 1980s. And that set me on the path of understanding that you could do great basic science, but you could also wear two hats and do great translational research as well. And I just think that's a no-brainer, actually. I've also been involved in commercializing research in other ways. As I said, I've co-founded several different biotech companies myself. I'm very happy, as being a senior person in Cambridge, to be able to be on the Seed Fund Committee. And also we spun out the Cambridge Innovation Capital, which was a patient capital fund, and I was on the main board of that. And I've also had experience of being a main board non-executive director on a FTSE 250 global animal breeding company called Genus PLC. So I've been around a lot of the different parts of the system. I've remained very, very strongly passionate about the whole business of innovation and translation. And I think that this is a key part of what a university should be doing. I think universities are great places, of course. I think they do great stuff. But actually, it's not about rankings, believe it or not. I know that people are very keen on rankings, but actually it's more about what we do and what we achieve for the world that's important as far as I'm concerned. We need to be closely involved in innovation and entrepreneurship. And we need to encourage it through our students, through researchers that work with our students, and in all of the relationships that we develop with our cities and communities to support this big agenda. And this is one of the really important things I think that a university can do. It's something that we do pretty well at Melbourne University, but I think it's something that we could do a lot better. And it's not a simple task. There are things in Melbourne already which are doing great work. So the Wade Institute for Entrepreneurship, of course, the Melbourne Entrepreneurial Centre. These are two important centres at the university which are supporting entrepreneurship on innovation and research, commercialisation and translation. We have other things going on, like the Melbourne Accelerator Programme, the Translating Research at Melbourne Initiative, or TRAM, and the development of major new projects, including, at the moment, we're building Melbourne Connect. It's coming out of the ground. Melbourne Connect will be ready to go in about a year's time, I think. And we're also we're a big part of an emerging campus on the site of Australia's largest urban renewal project at Fisherman's Bend. The state government bought the site where Holden Motors have left the manufacturing site there. The state government have bought the site, 35 hectares, and the University of Melbourne have bought 7 hectares of that to put a really very exciting new campus down there to do heavy engineering. Our architecture, building and planning people will go down there, and I'm hoping eventually we might even get the medics to go down there and work with the engineers on some exciting projects. So there's a lot of innovation happening in the university, and I think, but one thing I would like to say is that while I'm very keen on this whole agenda, I still think that the basic function of a university is to be the engine of discovery. And we mustn't forget that. All of my friends and colleagues in the venture capital and entrepreneurial space understand this. They understand that universities fundamentally need to be the engines of discovery, filling the front end of the pipeline with such force that it pushes through to eventually be picked up and developed by people who really know how to do that. So during the years ahead, while I'm Vice-Chancellor at Melbourne, you'll rest assured that our university, which is your university, of course, will continue to be an engine of discovery, but it will also continue to support and improve Australia's culture of entrepreneurship and innovation. So I think there'll be quite a lot to explore in the panel discussion later. Another thing I wanted to just say tonight is that another thing that's important to me is connecting with people, and particularly our alumni communities like the one here tonight. I think that I see a university as a community, actually. That community involves students, it involves staff, it involves our professional staff, but it also involves those people who used to be students and are now out in the big wide world, and who might indeed come back to the university to be a student later in life. We don't lose a connection with our community simply because you graduate. And I feel very strongly that our alumni are an integral part of the university and what we do. So I'd like to encourage that over the next few years while I'm Vice-Chancellor, and to maintain that connection with our community. You know, I've met Melbourne alumni in the UK, I've met them in the US, and I met many in Australia, of course. On Sunday night, I'm going to travel to India and Indonesia to launch the university's new strategic sort of direction in those two important countries. And I will meet alumni there as well. We have alumni all over the globe, actually. And we have, I think the University of Melbourne is one of the great universities of the world that educates leaders. We don't just make, in a simplistic way, job-ready graduates. We educate leaders, and that's a much bigger task. And those leaders pop up around the world doing great things, and many of them, those leaders are here tonight, I know. So our people, our community tend to be passionate about education, about knowledge, and about the transformative impact that universities can have in the real world. And I certainly am very strong on those things. I just want to mention that I'm also really very keen on the diversity and inclusion agenda. This is so straightforward to me that I find it difficult to understand those who are not so keen on it. You need a culture that welcomes people in a university. You shouldn't worry about their background, their sexuality, their gender, their abilities, their disabilities, their age, their ethnicities, their religions, their national backgrounds, or whatever. We need to be a place that's open to bringing in the best minds and the people who can help us to achieve things at the highest possible level of excellence. And, that's something that I think is very important. And building that culture of inclusion is very important to me. And I think universities have a very big role to play in this agenda because we do, we have arguments on campus. A university wouldn't be a university if we didn't have passionate disagreement about things. But it has to be passionate disagreement that's also respectful. People take diametrically opposite positions, but I'd like to think that we're an institution where people can do that and still remain friends at the end of the day. A scholarly community should be able to handle these important debates and by modelling civility to its members. And even though I might disagree strongly with you on a point, or you with me, we treat each other's views with respect and we still get along together. And this is something that I think is very important for society. At the moment, we're struggling to accommodate social media and all the other things that have happened in only the last 10 or 15 years, actually, don't forget. The bubbles that are created in those spaces are pernicious, actually, and damaging. And we need to make sure that we don't exist in a bubble and that we do talk across those bubbles and really understand each other. So I think that education and research are important in that agenda. I think education and research are part of the same spectrum of activity. I think one doesn't really go without the other. Some people don't agree with that view, but I'm very, very clear in my mind that if you want to truly educate people in the cutting edge of what's going on, you have to do that in a research environment with people who understand what the cutting edge really means. And I just would add that I came from a very humble background and got into the University of Cambridge as an undergraduate, which completely transformed my life. My dad was a plumber, my mum worked in a factory. So the culture shock of going to the University of Cambridge was quite dramatic. It took me a good 6 months to get anywhere near understanding what I was supposed to be doing there even, actually. But it really transformed my life, and I'm very keen to give back to young people in terms of transforming their lives by coming to a great university like the University of Melbourne. And I know we're not alone in that. There are other great universities too, but I'm here to talk about the University of Melbourne tonight, so that's what I'm going to do. So I would also like to say that I think a great university is a comprehensive university. We have to be very careful that we don't get driven by external powers into just focusing and concentrating on what happens to be important at that particular time. If we did that, we'd wind up just doing digital stuff and a bit of engineering and a bit of medical science. And we wouldn't be a properly comprehensive university. And the reason why that's important is because interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity are where a lot of the really exciting ideas arise. Those intersections of different disciplines. We have to have disciplinary depth and strength, absolutely. But the intersections of those disciplines are where you just do come up with interesting new ideas when you start talking to your colleagues in different disciplines. And then you can actually also think about what the really big questions are. The grand challenges was something that was started a while ago. And I think we should, of course, play in that space and help to solve the grand challenges. But I think we should invent our own grand challenges as well. We should be talking across disciplines to decide what the big questions are for the world and how we can come together in different formats to address those big questions with scholarship and research. These are complex problems, they're big problems, so they need usually complex answers, actually, and We need lots of different people, different kinds of expertise to find those answers. So just to hammer home the point, great universities like the University of Melbourne are precisely the places that should be doing this. And we should be doing that across the arts and humanities and the sciences, across engineering and medicine and law. There are great things we can do across those notional boundaries. And we have a glimpse of that in my distinguished panellists tonight, Felicity, Glenn, and our chair, Maxine. Their collective knowledge ranges across specialities in music, business, education, as well as many, many other areas. And I think that's a really interesting group of people to put together. I don't think we'll solve any real-world problems tonight. We might. You never know, but I don't think we will. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure we'll talk about a few. And I'm sure that all of us in the room will learn from the conversation we'll have tonight. I hope that it's also very enjoyable. It's really great to have the chance to meet you all tonight, and I'd like to thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Thanks, Duncan, and good evening, everyone. It's lovely to see so many here, so many alum here from Melbourne. In fact, some people I thought probably went to Sydney, actually did their degrees at Melbourne. And I know we've got a very good representation of people who did business, engineering, med, many other areas. And this is a conversation, I think it goes to exactly what the Vice-Chancellor has said, one of the complex issues, but one of those things absolutely critical to and central to our success as a nation, both in terms of our material welfare and, of course, the social richness of our lives as well. We're very keen for you to give us your questions, so I'm going to lead into the discussion and then come out to the audience as well. Vice-Chancellor, I wonder if I can start. I guess it's a segue from your old life, from one great university to another. But one of your colleagues was telling me recently that, in fact, a good pal of yours at Cambridge, Sir Gregory Winter, won the Nobel Prize only last year for chemistry. There were other winners in the US as well. But this was for, I gather, for engineering humanised antibodies. And of course, what was very interesting about his work was the way over the decades he had great commercial application with this discovery in terms of an application towards many drug therapies that are commonplace these days. Just tell us a little bit about his work and how that evolved at Cambridge, because it's pertinent to this discussion about innovation.
So I've known Greg since the early 1980s. One of my best friends actually was a student with me in Cambridge at the time, and he did his PhD with Greg Winter. He was Greg Winter's first PhD student, and he laid a lot of the groundwork for the work that eventually evolved into the work that got Greg the Nobel Prize. Greg's career was almost ended very early on because he was knocked off his bicycle in Cambridge by a car. And it wasn't so much the fact of being knocked off the bicycle that mattered, it was that he got up and punched the roof of the car so hard that he broke his wrist. That might say something about his aggressive nature in terms of succeeding, I don't know. But he's a remarkable man. And what they did was a very basic research, was trying to understand what the parts of an antibody molecule were that actually bound to the antigen. So antibodies bind to an antigen in a particular sort of shape, and there are bits of the molecule that are the bits that bind to the antigen. But then there's another big chunk of the molecule, which is the sort of scaffold upon which this binding site sits. And that scaffold, if you make the antibody in a mouse, looks like a mouse to the immune system. So if you put that mouse antibody into a human being, you make an immune response against the antibody, and that's not great, and you can have all sorts of bad side effects from doing that. So what Greg's work was dedicated to was humanizing antibodies, and that meant that he took if you imagine the ends of my fingers as being the binding site for the antigen, he could genetically engineer things such that he could take all those little chunks out and transplant them basically onto a human antibody scaffold. And so now you put the human antibody into a human being, and most of the time the human being doesn't make an immune response against that antibody. Absolutely brilliant. It was basic science because he wanted to understand how that worked, but then it was the application of that was of course obvious. And so he describes himself as a reluctant entrepreneur. In the early 80s, it wasn't normal for people to go out and be entrepreneurial and to do business. But it was so obvious that this needed to be translated.
And not normal in Cambridge?
Not normal in Cambridge or anywhere else for that matter, really, in those days. There were a few exceptional people, but mostly it wasn't normal.
So what was the next step for him then in that
So he founded
process?
a company called Cambridge Antibody Technology. And Cambridge Antibody Technology was so successful in developing this project that, in fact, before it went to market, the company was sold. I think it was AstraZeneca, but I can't remember. But the company was sold for getting on for about £700 million, I think. So Greg did very well out of that, which was nice for him.
Well, actually, just explain that. What's the reward for the academic inventor, if you like, vis-a-vis the university?
So interestingly,
from the sale to an AstraZeneca,
the sort of innovation in ecosystem back in Cambridge started in the late 70s, early 80s, really, and from that time onwards, there's been a very lax rules about who owns the IP. Unlike most places, including University of Melbourne, where the university owns the IP. Back there, the inventor owns the IP, and they can exploit it themselves, or they can exploit it through the university or whatever. And the story that university tells itself is that the money you make out of the patents is not that great, actually. So what we want to do is actually encourage entrepreneurial activity. And entrepreneurs hate to be put into straitjackets and hate to think they're losing their IP. So that was the narrative in Cambridge, and it seems to have worked there. It's not the same here, so that's a different ecosystem. So Greg, sold the company. He made quite a lot of money for himself out of that. But actually the thing that drove him was getting the stuff out there to treat people. And in fact, one of the humanized antibodies that Greg did through that process was the antibody that is now the third biggest selling blockbuster drug in the world. And if Greg hadn't done all that basic research understanding how to humanize those antibodies, that would not be out there.
Yeah.
And also, for example, an antibody you might have heard of called Herceptin, which is a breast cancer treatment.
Very common. Yeah.
My mate Paul, who was his PhD student, went to work at Genentech in California, and they developed Herceptin. So these things ramify out, and that's another piece of the action that's quite important.
So how have things developed? You said there it wasn't common in the 80s. How have things developed now to that point in Cambridge? And certainly involving some of the work you're involved in as well.
So people are encouraged to be entrepreneurial and spin out companies. There are mechanisms there in the university whereby people can do that, but there's also a relaxed attitude to people doing that independently. So there's help if you want it, but if you don't want it, you can do it yourself.
Does it mean that more academics these days would not call themselves reluctant entrepreneurs?
I think that's precisely right, and that the mindset has changed. And I think wherever we work, in the University of Melbourne, my mission is actually to get brilliant scientists who think that the only thing that matters is getting a great paper in a top journal, to understand that they can do that and they can also commercialise or translate their research. It's not just commercialisation. I think I want to make this point very clear, and we'll hear from Felicity, about the fact that there are many ways that you can translate your research. Commercialisation is but one sort of pathway whereby you can do that.
Yeah. I'm going to go on to Felicity's research in just a second. What, in the time that you have been here, what do you think are the lessons for Australia? Because, as I say, this is a pretty lively debate. We've got a federal government that is looking to universities and saying, we want more heft, we want more bang for the buck.
So
give us your view on that.
This is complicated. When I first started the job, there were quite a few people, I think, oh dear.
Oh.
Medical situation. Is he a medic or not? Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, obviously we have a medical emergency. If you could just bear with us for a few moments while we look after the health of one of our guests, then we really appreciate that. Thank you.
I think it's appropriate to continue, if you don't mind. I think our colleague and friend is being looked after by a doctor. That chap who was looking after was a qualified doctor. An ambulance has been called, and I think she will be looked after by the ambulance when that arrives. So if people don't agree with that, then we can end the event, but I would suggest that we could continue. Okay?
Everyone happy with that?
Thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, folks. Just wait till they do the clean-up there. Was that?
Yeah.
Right. Right, okay.
I was just told by a friend over there that the lady who's just left was one of the original alumni, used to run the Alumni Association in Sydney. Is that correct? Yeah, thank you.
Right, well, we wish her well, and we'll get a progress report soon. So,
Yeah.
okay. Look, we will continue, but look, Felicity, I'm going to bring you in there, and I'll come back to you, Vice Chancellor.
No worries.
Felicity, your area, and I'm going to get you to explain this, is not in, engineering or hard industry or whatever, but it's come out of your work in fine arts, and it's about the application of music therapy across aged care and other areas. So just tell us a little bit about that, because, folks, this is and it's exactly what the Vice-Chancellor was alluding to. Not all innovation is about hard commercialisation. A lot of it is about the public good as well. So, Felicity, tell us about your work.
Thanks, Maxine. Yes, and listening to the Vice-Chancellor talk about interdisciplinarity and creativity and solving problems, that's kind of what we think about when we think about music therapy. So our field is using music in very strategic and creative ways to help a range of different people with different needs. So we work with babies in the NICU, we work with adolescents with various mental health challenges, we work with young people with disabilities, adults with disabilities, people in neurorehabilitation centres, and that's the field that I've specialised in, but also I've specialised in working with people with dementia. We also work in cancer care, palliative care, all sorts of neurodegenerative diseases. We cover the spectrum, really.
Just to pick up on one of those,
Yes.
as you said, you mentioned dementia there, and I think you were telling me earlier that in fact a lot of your work is the application is with the families of carers. So tell us about that.
Sure. So one of the projects that we're getting up and running at the moment is working with family carers of people living with dementia. And so what we do is we know that music, it stimulates autobiographical recall. We remember things through music. It stimulates our emotions. We feel better with music. The sex, drugs and rock and roll. It's all connected in our neural networks. And we really draw on those principles to help people with dementia. And so what we're doing in our study is training family carers to use music in very strategic ways. We all know that music is good for us. We all enjoy music. But knowing how to use it in different contexts is not something that the average person knows.
Give us an example. What does it mean to use music in a strategic way?
Shall I give you a concrete example?
Yeah, please.
Sure.
Yep.
So let's just imagine that you're caring for your loved one who has dementia and they're about to go and take a shower. We know that getting undressed, it's cold at the moment, right? They're sitting there on a chair, but ready to be wheeled into a shower, and it's cold, they're distressed, they don't know why they're undressed, they're confused, and they start to get agitated, and if they start to get agitated, then they're at risk of having a falling out of the chair. So what we do is we show the carers how to sing in a way that calms that person with dementia, to connect with them so that they are less disoriented, and to also calm the carer as well, because if the carer is stressed, it's going to become even more complicated.
And how are things working? What's the feedback? What's the impact?
Oh, the feedback is really good. We're really showing, but it's also not just about managing the symptoms, it's also about the relationship too, because we know that people who have dementia, they start to kind of lose their connection with other people. They start to forget who their family members are. And that's actually often more distressing than the actual management of the symptoms themselves. And so music, because it takes them back, they become animated, they recall things about their past, they also start to recognise people around them through this process. And then you can start to see this connection again, the reconnection, I should say, with the carer and other family members.
And Felicity, this is all being scaled up through research. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we've got a study that's been funded in part by the National Health and Medical Research Council, but also involving 5 other countries in Europe who also have funding from their countries. And we're going to be recruiting 500 dyads, or carer and person with dementia, so 1,000 people in our study. And we've done the pilot, and we're now ready to recruit, actually, for the big study now.
Right. Now, isn't this interesting? So you're talking about this at a time when, in fact, we're hearing a lot of distressing stories coming out of the Royal Commission into aged care, and we also know what the demographic figures look like and all the rest of it. So this is a critical area, isn't it? That we improve these therapies.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, just last night I was on a Zoom meeting with people from my association, the Australian Music Therapy Association, and we're in the process of writing a submission to the Royal Commission for Aged Care and making some recommendations about what we would think they should do. But also some of the other work that I've been doing in residential care homes, such as Bupa homes. We know that with the Royal Commission there's been challenges. And so we actually want to work with them to work out how we can and help the people that are living in their homes.
Good. Glenn, can I move on to you now? Quite a different area, but in fact, I mean, some of the businesses that you work with may in fact have investments in this area, but that's another issue. But as we heard earlier, your work at the business school sees you working at the point where innovation meets sustainability. So tell us about that.
So businesses have a real challenge when they think about sustainability, and some of this is about ways of thinking, some of it is about underlying technology. And so what I've been doing is working with companies so they can respond more innovatively. Sometimes that is very technological, so taking clean energy from the lab into the field. But often it can be about new practices, or even about new ways of creating value. So let me give you a short practical example. Company that's one of the leaders in carpet tiles, carpet squares, what they would prefer we call modular carpet, has been on a 20-year mission to decrease the environmental impact of their operations. And one piece of this was trying to minimize the use of the adhesives that go on the back of carpet. Those are not very sustainable in their manufacture, their transport, or their disposal. And that new carpet smell that we all enjoy, a lot of that is actually volatile organic compounds, VOCs, coming off the adhesives, and that's not good for any of us. Right. So in one sense of innovation, they went kind of the biomimicry route and ended up designing a backside for their carpet tiles that somewhat mimics the way a gecko's foot sticks. So you just put this down and it wants to stick to the floor by itself. But it could still slip side to side. So then they invented what they call tactiles, just a little palm-sized square of plastic with a light adhesive on one side. And you just put that down on the floor and put 4 adjacent carpet tiles, put the corners on it, boom, you're installed. So on the one hand, they've really satisfied the sustainability goal. They've reduced the use of adhesive by about 90% by doing this. But the other thing they've done is made carpet that goes down faster, that you can move in the moment it's down, because you don't have to wait for the outgassing to stop. And if any of you have had the joy of removing carpet, the nice thing about this is to remove carpet, you take a carpet knife and you slice 4 of those little tactile pads and lift it out. So they're creating value for customers who don't care at all about the sustainability side of it. And so I work with companies to help find those sorts of routes, and that has been a fairly effective way to get companies and organizations and governments to move towards more sustainable practice. Without making it about thou shalt.
And is this more and more of a mindset among corporates?
Increasingly, but it's always still a challenge to make the business case. Because if you think about a manager, they have to balance a lot of things. They do have to balance return to shareholders and other stakeholders and employees, but most of them I find also want to leave their kids and their grandkids a better world. And so helping them think more creatively about how sustainability can play out in their particular organization allows them to make that business case and to move forward in a more productive way.
And those, across those businesses that you've worked with, what is it, are there things that distinguish them, those organizations that really have this, that get this, that have innovation as part of their DNA?
So one of the things that doesn't distinguish them is industry. And I think a lot of people think about dirty industries and clean industries. Now, if you think about making carpet, it takes a tremendous amount of petrochemicals, takes a tremendous amount of heat, a tremendous amount of water. It's expensive to ship. You scrape it up, you put it in a landfill where it doesn't biodegrade. This is not a classic green industry by any means, nor is it a particularly high-tech industry. But it's where, and this is what I do find is still common in the ones that have really succeeded. It had a leader. It had a leader who opened The Ecology of Commerce, a book that was very popular in the 90s, and discovered that he had been named as a plunderer of the earth. You read that over your Weet-Bix in the morning. And that really started him on this journey of bringing the company along. And he had to convince, I think, some fairly dubious senior colleagues that this was not only the right thing to do, but could be good for all of the stakeholders. So oftentimes it comes from the leaders, from the top, and I think what we'd like to do is get to the point where it doesn't have to be like that.
Yeah, I guess the problem then is if that particular leader leaves, how is that innovation sustained?
And it's not always, is the sad story. But if it's had time to really get up to speed, what you tend to find is people now see the value in it, and it becomes part of the business model. It just becomes part of the way of thinking.
Yeah. So Glenn, in terms to bring the universities into this, how do you see your role then at the university in helping business to adopt these sort of models?
It's like all we do, everything we do at the university, it's multifold. It's research, it's discovering what are the best practices, what has worked, what have the obstacles been, and then it's in the classroom, turning it into teaching. And being at a business school, we teach all levels and have a great opportunity to teach people who are coming back to mid-career to build on their skills, people who are still working. And then I think the other thing to pick up on the point of interdisciplinarity, a lot of it is reaching out to colleagues in engineering and sustainability and law and helping bring their lessons together, because I think we have an ability to do that at a university that's a little different than how you can do it if you're a frontline manager and you're trying to get product out of the door. So I think that's one of the other roles we can
Okay,
play.
Felicity, do you agree with that approach? And I'm just also thinking about, well, you'd be dealing with a lot of different disciplines. Equally, you were telling me before, you've got PhD students lining up to be involved in your area, which is quite encouraging. Tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. So just thinking about the interdisciplinarity aspect too, because being the creative arts, music, but also being a health discipline, we really embrace both the health sector and the creative arts sector. But also with this project with the carers, we're also bringing in engineering because we're going to be translating this into an app. So that we don't have to have someone come to the home and do it in a face-to-face context, but actually create something that can be scaled up and taught. The same skills that we teach can be taught through an app. So that's, again, you know, bringing in another discipline into this. And we have also health economists also working with us to work out how cost-effective this is as well. And that's, I mean, for music therapy, this is kind of quite innovative. This is a new thing for us to be thinking about the cost benefit. It's not really a term that we like to use, but it's not a term we like to use, but we're starting to accept that this is part of the way we have to go.
Don't tell your dean that, yeah. Duncan, coming back to you, you've had a couple of terrific announcements this week, and I'll just come to one of them. It's very pertinent here. The new science gallery at the University of Melbourne. Now tell us about that, and what kind of work are you looking for that institute to produce?
So Science Gallery is a global network that was first started in Trinity College in Dublin, in Ireland. We're the latest science gallery to come on board. I can't remember how many there are actually, but I think there are about 7 or 8 around the world. We are currently building a new precinct on Swanston Street in Melbourne, next to the university, which we're calling Melbourne Connect. Melbourne Connect is going to be a place that's focused on digital stuff, but it's going to bring our engineers, our computer scientists, along with big business and small business and others in the business domain, all together in one place. And one of the floors in one of the buildings within that Melbourne Connect is going to be Science Gallery. And Science Gallery is designed to do innovative and exciting things across science and arts to drag in young people. And they're young people, you know, school children, right through to people in their 20s, and why not 92-year-olds who feel young too.
And they'll get some, startup money to work for 6 months? Or what?
So no, it's actually, there'll be a series of exhibitions and activities and live experiments and those kinds of things that all of these kids and others can get involved with. So at the moment, for example, we haven't built it yet. It's in the process of being built. It'll be open in about a year and a bit's time. But in the meantime, we're doing a couple of pop-ups.
Yep.
So at the moment, we've got a pop-up that's called Disposable. And one of the elements of that, there are 2 elements I'm going to talk about. There are several others, but one of the elements is styrofoam is very hard to get rid of. But mealworms will eat styrofoam.
What will
Mealworms, a particular
Mealworms.
wormy thing.
Not served this evening as part of the canapes, don't worry.
Well, you probably could eat them, and that's another thing. The future of food probably will be insects, but anyway.
Okay, so
but
mealworms
eat styrofoam and can digest it because of the bugs in their guts and can use it as an energy source, believe it or not. So there's a in the pop-up outside my building, actually outside my office every morning, there's a big pile of styrofoam. There's a lot of mealworms eating it.
Yeah,
It's just extraordinary.
So this is the barista's best friend.
It's enthused me and sparked my imagination. So let alone what it does. And we've got groups of school kids coming around the campus. I've seen many Science Week, of course, as well, but lots of groups of school kids have been there with their teachers being told about this stuff. Right next door is the urinatron. And the urinatron...
I saw this on social media today. I know what's coming. Okay, yeah.
So people donate their urine samples, and it goes into a series of flasks. And because of some clever chemistry, you can actually generate electrons from the urine. And the electrons can be gathered into a battery. And so you're making electricity from human waste product.
You know, the social media I saw on this today was P for power.
That's right.
Which apparently can power your phone.
Yeah. So basically, if you donate a urine sample to this project, you're allowed to charge your phone from the battery that's in there for 5 minutes or something.
So look, folks.
I donated my sample on Monday evening, actually, and I haven't yet charged my phone. So.
Now, I know you've had the Science Festival, is that right, in Sydney? But look, you've got to come and see these pop-ups, okay? Come down on the weekend, okay? Right.
Well, that's the type of thing, once Science Gallery is actually built, that's the type of thing that is going to be displayed in the Science Gallery, and I route it on a regular basis. And I mean, just to finish off with that, we had a fantastic launch on Monday night, actually, in the university. And Peter and Ruth McMullen, two great friends of the university, donated $4 million to help us to build the Science Gallery. And that's the power of
very generous
of that kind of very generous act.
Yeah.
It's quite extraordinary, actually.
Yeah. Look, I'm going to come out to the audience very soon, but I just wanted to link back to where you started talking about Cambridge. All of those ideas, whether on the cute side or the very substantial side, again, how are we going to make the link between that and those really good ones and commercialise them?
Do you mean in the Melbourne context?
In terms of what might come out of that Science Gallery. Scale up.
So I think what you can do is build an ecosystem is a word that's used a lot in this space. We can build an ecosystem around all of these different things that we're doing, which facilitates people who want to be entrepreneurial. And what I think we often have in universities, and it's not a criticism of Melbourne or Australian universities in particular, it's all over the place, we often have things that are inadvertent barriers to that activity. You know, an entrepreneurial person thinks, I might like to spin out a company to do this. And they go and look on the website for who can help them to spin out a company, and there's nothing there, even though there could be people in the back office who could help them do that. And it's simple things like that start to build the ecosystem and facilitate that kind of activity. But then we've also got to, as I tried to say earlier, we've also got to make sure that the brilliant people who are maybe having these ideas are put in touch with, and I mean this, the brilliant people in the VC, venture capital world, and the brilliant people in the big business world and all the rest of it, who can come in and help these people to be successful, to mentor them and nurture them and work with them indeed. And maybe all of this soft nurturing stuff is irrelevant, because actually they're coming in because they see a great idea and they want to take it and commercialize it and make money out of it. And we should not be ashamed of that. We should be proud of that.
Indeed, the secret is how, as many in this audience would know, we've been talking around these issues for a very long time, and in some cases there have been some spectacular successes. Okay, let me come out to the audience. We've got microphone people here. I see a hand over there. Okay, if we can go there first. Thank you.
I just wanted to understand whether you see a role for the universities as being an agnostic player in influencing government policy when it comes to innovation, or whether it comes to just general economic policy as to where we see Australia moving forward, and bringing together stakeholders so that, you know, a fair and balanced view can be given for those policies.
So shall I go first? First thing to say is that the word you use, agnostic, is right. We cannot be seen to be a political player. I'm very clear on that. However, I talk to federal and state ministers all of the time, and federal and state shadow ministers all of the time. And whenever I speak to them, I say to them, you know, that the resources of the university are there for you to use in thinking through some of the policy issues that you might have, and working with our people if they can help you to design better policy. So the door is open. We have the Melbourne School of Government. We have other entities in the university that already work closely with politicians. We have the my word, what's it called? I can't remember. We have this thing where we take women and help them into politics.
Oh, the Pathways to Power.
Pathways to Power.
Yep,
that's it.
yep.
I was going to say Pathways to Politics.
Also funded by another philanthropist.
Absolutely right, indeed.
Harold Schwartz.
And, you know, Pathways to Power was launched by a Labour and a Liberal coalition person at the same time, two women from the two different parties. You know, it is possible to get the two parties in the same room together and doing good things, because they both recognise the the strength of working with a university that's got open mind about how to help develop policy. So I think there will occasionally be things, however, where all of the evidence and all of the scientific evidence about a certain matter points in a particular direction. And then I think the scientists or the people involved in doing that work have to publicly say that all of the evidence says that the planet is warming up and we've got to do something about it. Yeah. Just to quote a contentious example.
Glenn?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think sometimes there's a lot we can do that's very quiet. So I just had the opportunity to co-convene a roundtable around how different sectors, government, industry, and NGOs can cooperate around international development, things like malaria eradication. And we had 14 guests from the major mining companies, from DFAT, from Victoria State government, from major funding agencies, and it was an off-the-record opportunity to describe experiences they had had, to try and bring together a sense of what were the big challenges they were facing. We didn't get as far as identifying best practices. I think we identified common problems. And this is a group now that we're going to be bringing together in another 9 to 12 months and probably trying to expand. Because one of the things we picked up was that a lot of the best learning was very siloed. And so I think we brought some expertise, but more than that, we brought being a safe space, being a neutral space, a space dedicated to the sharing of knowledge. And I don't think most of the people in my building knew we were doing that, but it was still just a very quiet, effective way to help advance the type of things you discussed.
Can I be a little bit ornery for a moment and say, it seems to me we're in a world where there's a whole bunch of people, probably like everyone in this room, that thinks the evidence base is terrific, and if we're all very rational and we work through these policy issues, we'll get a wonderful solution. And then we've got a whole bunch of nation states that are being run by people who couldn't care less about the evidence base. They know what it is, but they're saying, sorry, I'm not going to get elected that way. We've never had a wider disconnect between. I'm thinking of your own, the UK. David Runciman would be the first to say, if they'd actually walked into the door and come to a university like Cambridge, we could have talked to them about how they might craft questions for a referendum around perhaps separation from the EU. We could have had that discussion inside the academy. But of course, it didn't happen.
David's a very good friend of mine, actually, in that
Great podcast.
Yeah, he's really smart. How Democracy Ends is his latest book.
Yep,
It's a really good read. I recommend it very strongly. But I think you're absolutely right, and I've been saying this a lot recently, actually. We do have to generate the evidence base. We have to really get the evidence base out there, but we must not expect that the evidence will sway people's minds. We're in a very strange...
So we're stuck.
We're in a very postmodern world, actually. Where the narrative is all and the evidence doesn't matter that much. So what we've got to do, and be much smarter at, I think, is have that powerful evidence base, but then tell the story in a convincing way. And we have to get down and dirty with these people and get the gloves off and really take them on in different ways.
What do you mean?
And that means speaking truth to power. It means using social media in different ways to get the message across. I don't think we're very good at that. Frankly, whereas you've got back in my I've been here a year, so I've only got 3 more years to wait until I become a citizen, so that's, it's not too long. But in my current nation of birth, anyway, we've got the Farage type people, Nigel Farage, and he's fantastic at manipulating the media to get a completely vacuous position promulgated to the population. And that's something that we've got to learn about and work out, how we can do that in a way that does not descend to that level, but does actually work in that space in some kind of way. And I don't know how to do that, but we need to think that through very carefully.
As you started off, we're talking about complex problems and complex solutions, and it's very difficult to sell that in an attention-grabbing way. Okay, another question. I'll go here. Okay, can we microphone down here? Thank you. Gentleman there, that's it.
Thank you. My name is Raúl Esteves. My question is, how do you convince the mom and dads, the father that is a plumber, the mother that works in a factory, that Melbourne University is the place for that child to go to and to become the person that they can ultimately become and be a part of society that can make the changes that governments actually need in order to move forward?
That's a tough question, actually, because part of me wants to say that it is so obvious that that's the thing to do, that it's you know, and but then that immediately comes across as a sort of complacent position. So we do think about that a lot. I think we're operating in a time where a lot of our political friends on all parties are really quite transactional about this, and so it's only seen through the lens of the dollar. And so they can then make an argument that why would you spend lots of money getting education when you're not going to make that much money actually extra out of coming to university. In fact, even that argument is not correct, but let's not concentrate on that. I think we've got to sell much more actively the idea that being broadly educated is something that makes your life better. It's better. You have a better life if you've got a wide range of interests, if you understand the world better. And if you're an intelligent person, to just be a wage slave all your life is not fulfilling, actually. You know, most people want more in their lives than that. And I mean, again, that might sound pretty idealistic and slightly old-fashioned, but I think that's where I come from, and I think that's the message we need to be promulgating quite strongly, actually. You know, my life would be incomplete without music, although I'm a scientist. It would be utterly incomplete without music. And I've played music a lot in my youth, and visual art and other things, reading books and understanding stuff about that is important to me because I'm intellectually interested.
What instrument do you play?
Well, I did play. No, I learned classical clarinet, and then I from there learned saxophone.
Oh, I didn't know.
And I sang as a boy treble, and I played clarinet in national youth orchestras, and I played sax. When I went to Cambridge, we formed a big band, and so I played a first tenor saxophone in a big band that did Basie, Ellington, and all that sort of stuff.
Ah, you joined a group in Melbourne?
Well, I was in a rock band too in Oxford, but that's when I had hair down here and a leather jacket. But
We'll
I haven't.
jam later.
I haven't joined any sort of. I haven't played music properly for a long time, and
Okay.
it takes a lot of practice to get back to scratch.
Okay.
So.
Glenn, and I will take one more question then, and we do need to bring Karen back.
Real briefly on that, I think one of the things you can convey to people is that learning to learn has its own value, particularly as the world gets more and more uncertain. And I think your work is such a great example of that, in that if you came in and just thought I'm going to learn music, I'm going to learn healthcare, you wouldn't get to what you were doing. So some of it is just learning to learn, and some of it is not knowing what you will learn and how wonderful it can be, which, still is a little pie in the sky.
Okay. So yes, I'll take a question there.
Hi, I'm part of the Sydney Philharmonic Choir, if you want to join us as well. So we're into music. I have a question about how to use technology to actually build this University of Melbourne alumni in Sydney, because I heard of this event by Facebook pop-up, but it would be great to have the technology to link us together because we are the underdogs here in Sydney, and we want to connect and work together. Could the university help us to do this more in the future?
We will have someone from Advancement talk to you at the conclusion of this event. Thank you for that. And are you happy to be involved? Yeah.
Volunteering.
Terrific. Thank you. And I will there was a question right down the end there. Yep. Microphone right down the back of the room. Thank you, and that'll be the last one.
Thank you very much. Are entrepreneurial projects and partnerships overseen by an ethics committee?
I suppose I have to answer that one. Everything in the university has got ethical frameworks around it. We have for example, we have a committee that considers whether we can take grants and money from various sources to do particular work. So something that's very pertinent at the moment, of course, is that committee would look at, if we were offered money by Huawei, for example, that committee would look very carefully at whether we could accept it or not, what it's for, what the likely outcomes are, what the contractual obligations might be, all of those things. So yes, we do have a committee for that. We also have ethics committees, of course, for medical research and research involving humans in general. So I think the answer to that is yes. I hope so.
I can attest that certainly my faculty, which is education,
mine.
we have ethical protocols on everything. In fact, I'll give one example. We have a very substantial contract to help with a rewrite of curriculum, reform of schools with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It took a very long time to negotiate, and it's kind of on watch all the time. Yeah, yeah. Look, I think I will say we've really only touched the sides on this, but I'm aware of the clock. But would you show your appreciation for the comments you've heard this evening? And I'll invite Karen back to close.
Yeah. Thank you, Maxine, and thank you to all the panelists. Just thought I'd give you a quick update on our guest, and she's fine. Not fine, but she is conscious and feeling fine, a little bit embarrassed, but she's been taken to the hospital in ambulance for further observation. And I'd just like to extend our thanks to Joe and Tanya, two alumni with medical background who were extraordinarily helpful at the time, so all is well. So thank you for your patience. And, yeah. So I guess just, I thought, just in terms of wrapping up, share with you a couple of observations and things that I confront oftentimes when I'm out speaking in the community with alumni friends and industry partners and this discussion with government about this transactional mode that we're in. And I guess one of the takeaways is the criticality of pursuing just blue sky ideas about you have no idea where they're going to lead, but you can go way out into left field and back again and come on to some really interesting really interesting things that actually become reality. And if we, think about the work that you're leading in the music therapy, I'm sure, well, we know that in the early days, people probably thought it was pretty kooky, but yep. Look at what's happening now. Yes. And and that comes through interdisciplinarity. And then I think one of the other ideas, Glenn, that you advanced was you can have ideas and they're really great, but if you don't actually implement innovation and change, nothing will ever change. And so therefore, the role of leadership and having vocal advocates and champions for taking big ideas forward. And I guess the other piece, the conversation about policy and how do we create change is that the vital importance of respectful public debate. And these are all areas where universities do play a critical role and will continue to do so. So I guess I'll leave you with those thoughts. Maxine said somebody's going to come up here and talk to you a little bit about alumni and how you can stay connected. But we would like to acknowledge the power of the Melbourne Alumni Network. And we hear from students, alumni, the world over how valuable that network can be. But the network isn't something that we at the university have a lot of power over. It actually comes from you. And so to have you stand up and say, yes, I'll help out, that's what we need, people who are willing to actively participate and mobilize in so many different ways, big and small. And so I have two things for you. One is a suggestion and one is a request. And that would be if a University of Melbourne graduate reaches out to you through LinkedIn or through email, or they might ring you up out of the blue and request a meeting because they have some idea or want to talk to you about something, take them up on it. It might cost a few minutes of time, but at the end of the day, and you might not agree, as we were talking about public respectful debate, you might not agree with what an idea is going, but you can have a conversation with people that can really change a person's life and also it creates the power of the network. And I guess the other request is, I don't know if any of you have seen this card out on the tables, Ask Alumni. It's a powerful new program that we've launched at the University of Melbourne using technology. And it's a way for our alumni to really give back to the student body. Which is why, what is the program? Well, the Ask Alumni is a way to connect with the student community through the use of the internet, whether it's Zoom or whatever. We don't have an app, I don't think. We'll ask James if there's going to be an Ask Alumni app. He's out there at the back. But it's a way to connect with our students without really an extensive obligation. All we ask is that you give up 30 minutes of your time through email, through Zoom, through teleconference. If it actually works out that you can connect face-to-face, that would be fabulous. But we find that our alumni are just, and our students are just taking it up by the thousands. The program was implemented 1 year ago, August 2018, and already we've had more than 1,500 alumni sign up as mentors and over 5,000 students. So there's more than enough students for every alumni in the crowd. So if you are interested, just pick up one of these cards, follow the link, or Google Ask Alumni on the website, and join the bigger community of 400,000 people. Well, you're already part of it. Just activate, really, is what it's about. So that's enough from me, and I'd like you to again express your thanks to the panelists for the conversation tonight. And invite you to continue for more conversation in the back of the room over some wine and canapes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.